For conservatives, the battle has been a long time in the making, but thanks to the Supreme Court, the decision to restrict or outlaw abortion altogether is now in the hands of state legislatures. The idea being that the issue is better left to the people, and where do the people have the most influence? Their state governments. Except that's no longer true. In the latest issue of The New Yorker, Jane Mayer reports on the rise of right-wing extremism within state houses, where lawmakers who are wildly out of step with voters are free to do what they please without fear of being voted out. She focuses on Ohio, where in June the state's General Assembly instituted an abortion ban so extreme that a 10-year-old rape victim was forced to travel to Indiana to terminate her pregnancy. Jane Mayer is The New Yorker's chief Washington correspondent. Her latest piece is State Legislators Are Torching Democracy. All right, Jane, thank you very much for being here. As I read all of your pieces, I read this one with a sense of foreboding and horror. But talk to me about what's going on in Ohio. This abortion law, it's not in step with what Ohioans want.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Katie. Yeah, I mean, what's so fascinating about Ohio is it's long been seen as a swing state, a kind of a bellwether of American politics. And what is going on there is that extremists have taken over the legislature. So when the Supreme Court says just leave it to the people on abortion and give it back to the state legislatures, it's really gaslighting, because what they know is the state legislatures in states like Ohio have been gerrymandered by the majority, the Republican majorities there, so that they really no longer are Democratic. They don't reflect the views of the state. The state is about 64% to 56% Democrat, Republican to Democrat. So, you know, close. But the legislature is legislating to the right of South Carolina.
Which is much more extreme than even where the Republicans, most of the Republicans are in Ohio. When you're talking about abortion, the ban that they instituted is, again, wildly out of step with the voters. You mentioned gerrymandering. How did this gerrymandering come to be in Ohio, and why can't voters vote any of these lawmakers out if they're so out of step with the electorate?
Well, so you would think they could, right? But what's happened is these districts have been drawn starting in right after 2010. So we're now seeing a decade of this. And what the districts are doing is making it impossible for Republicans to lose. They're drawn in such a way that the Democrats can't beat the Republicans. And because of that, the only incentive that the Republicans have is to go further and further right. In case of a primary challenge. That's the only thing they're really worried about at this point.
But Ohioans voted to change their constitution to outlaw this sort of gerrymandering.
Exactly. And so what's shocking about what's happening in Ohio is the general public is relatively moderate, and it tried to fix this. They did all the things you do to fix something like this, which is they amended the state constitution to have fairer districts. But they were overridden by a couple of Trump judges on the federal court that have made it impossible to fix the situation right now. So they're moving into a midterm election with districts that their own courts, the state Supreme Court, has said are unconstitutional because they're so unfair. And they're pushing extremism. So you're getting crazy extremist bills out of a place like Ohio. And it's not the only state like that. That's what's also important.
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, what Ohioans did is they changed their constitution a couple times. They made it illegal. There were a number of cases that the Supreme Court in Ohio said, hey, listen, these are not constitutional the way that you've drawn these maps. They said it a bunch of times to the Republicans. The Republicans kept redrawing the maps in not legal ways, not constitutional ways, pushed it back to the point where it got so close to an election that a federal court came in and said, hey, listen, this is too close to an election. So they basically got this one away for free. And then there was a Republican who tweeted about this. Bill cites a majority leader of the House, and you read about this, who jeered at his Democratic opponent, saying, too bad, so sad, we win again. He continued, now I know it's been a tough night for all you libs. Pour yourself a glass of warm milk and you will sleep better. The game is over and you lost. The game is over and you lost. They intentionally created an illegal map and are laughing about it, according to David Pepper, who's a former Democratic lawmaker that you spoke with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a breakdown of sort of the rule of law. It's the breakdown of sort of democratic norms. If you saw it in another country, you would say, oh my God, you know, democracy's coming unglued at the seams in your state. But it's, you know, it's a slow boil that's gotten us to this point. And it's really, we're seeing the consequences now with such extreme legislation that a 10-year-old girl would be denied an abortion after she's been raped. And, you know, it's just a kind of a shocking situation, really.
This goes for guns. It goes for what's being taught in schools. There's an anecdote about one of the lawmakers talking about both sides of the Holocaust needs to be taught. You can get into that in the article. But I do want to ask you, the article focuses on Ohio, and you mentioned this a second ago, but it's not. This is not only happening in Ohio. It's happening in state legislatures across the country, state legislators that are wildly out of step with most Americans. And that's where Republicans have focused for years. What have Democrats done?
Well, I mean, they too have been, you know, gerrymandered in some states, but for instance, in New York State, the Democrats tried to gerrymander the districts, but when the courts ruled that they can't get away with it, they abided by the courts. What's different in Ohio is they basically thumb their nose at the courts. And so they've kind of are getting away with murder there. I mean, since this story posted, I've gotten messages from so many people in so many states saying, oh my God, it's happening here too. Because it was a nationwide effort by the Republican Party in 2010. And a decade later or more, a dozen years later, we're really seeing the consequences, which is legislation coming out of these states far more extreme than American voters. It looks like the world is turning bright red. It's actually not. It's just the legislatures.